Oopsie. Okay, so Wrycraft on Tragedy Part 2. We got up to the Renaissance and I was talking to you about how you might know the name Petrarch because of Petrarchian sonnets, a particularly buttoned down and very tightly respected form of sonnets, but actually Petrarch himself was a humanist and explored the nature of tragedy quite significantly in his other writings. Feel free to explore, it's quite enlightening. In the Renaissance, education often focused on classical writers from the Roman era. They didn't actually know that much about ancient Greece during the Renaissance. Most of their work relied on what the Romans had to say. Therefore, if you think back to what I said about the Romans in the last screencast, a lot of their understanding of tragedy related to the discursive side of things and the persuasive things. So we're looking at this idea of long explanations and soliloquies, and we're also looking at narration, and we're looking at the idea of the form of rhetoric. So a lot of the education in Renaissance era, and we're talking about coming up on the beginnings of Shakespeare and so on as well, is looking at Roman men of letters, so those writing diaries, those recording things, looking at the works of the philosophers like Aristotle and Socrates and so on, which were available, and then developing distinctions between the writing styles, so comedy, tragedy and so on. A humanist tragedy exists in 5 acts. This might be really familiar to you because this is how Shakespeare writes. Generally has 3 main noble characters. So if you think about Macbeth, you think about Romeo and Juliet, or you think about Hamlet and think about who those noble characters might be. It always drops you in media res, right into the middle of the action. So at the beginning of a humanist tragedy, stuff's already happened and you're already kind of trotting along to catch up with what's happened and what's happening. It uses good standard English or good high style language. So there's not a lot of slang going on, and when it is used, it's to show the characters of low class and low quality. We don't get shown the horror on the stage. So it's as in Macbeth, when we are described how he unseamed someone from the nave, i.e. belly button, to the chops, i.e. chin. It's described to us. We're not shown him chopping up his enemies on the battlefield. Lots of English writers later on rejected this because it was popular on the continent and undoubtedly performed in Britain and undoubtedly a really good influence on Shakespeare, but ultimately humanist tragedy belonged in France and Italy, and English writers rejected it. If we think about Shakespeare, we've got this idea of some of the influences. So we've got Seneca and the Roman tragedies, and then humanist translations of those stories. As I said before, Shakespeare is unlikely to have known about Greek conventions, but more modern tragic writers will have done so. For example, Tennessee Williams writing in Streetcar Named Desire, or J.B. Priestley in An In Spectacles, but would have known about Greek conventions and will have put those in. There you can see there are 4 styles of drama that you could look up. A quick read of the Wikipedia page will inform you of everything you need to know about those. I don't need to describe them through to you. What we have got, however, is this idea of the Jacobean conventions widely established. I am very sure that your teacher has told you that Jacobean theatre was entertainment for the masses. So there were things in there for everybody, but Shakespeare often took the opportunity to pop a little bit of education in there too. So if you think about the Shakespearean tragedies that you know, you'll be able to see ways in which he is guiding the audience to reflect on behaviours or historical incidents, or maybe even politics or social reforms that are going on at the time. Think about what that means. Okay, so we're thinking about Macbeth particularly. We are thinking about how Shakespeare is using that tragic form to say to his audience, hey, if you go against the king and the great chain of being, this is what happens to you. If you try and defeat the way that the natural order progresses, this is what happens to you. You get your head chopped off and you are referred to as a dead butcher. And taking that opportunity to say to the vast mass of people that would have seen a play, this needs to be sorted out, isn't a small thing, and it's certainly something you should think about when you're reflecting on context with Shakespeare. Again, if we're thinking about Romeo and Juliet, we're thinking about this idea of the toxic nature of conflict between 2 families, and the sad death of Romeo and Juliet. And of course, everyone forgets that Paris gets killed too. And, you know, he's described as quite a hottie. He's totally the it man. If the Capulets want Juliet to marry him, there must be something very special about him. He dies too. So these young, beautiful people die because of this ancient grudge. And Shakespeare again is saying, think carefully about who you bear grudges against, because sometimes you lose the thing that is most dear to you because of the way you behave. So if we move a little further, we're looking into sort of kind of medieval Dark Ages and so on, and we're thinking about all the kinds of ways that people were educated, and it was very often church driven at this point. So we've got mystery and miracle plays, often shown in tableau. You might be used to that from primary school, wherever you pose up the nativity to make all the parents go ooh and ah when they're looking at you all holding baby dolls wrapped in cloth. But then we've also got this idea of representations of moral choices, and again it takes us back to Shakespeare's form. But not just Shakespeare. We think about J.B. Priestley. He is very clearly moralizing throughout an Inspector Calls and talking about when we make these decisions to treat people differently because they are of a different class, we make that moral decision to corrupt ourselves. So vulgarity and farce come in after that as well. In Shakespeare's time, of course, he uses those things to break up the tension. You think about the part with the gatekeeper, knock, 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 who's there? When people consider Shakespeare to have invented the knock, knock joke with that bit, but it was there to break up the tension. And if you look at most tragedies have a bit, one or two bits, where there's a lighter moment, which just allows the audience to catch their breath and reflect on what they've seen. So if we think carefully about the nature of a mystery or a miracle or morality play, we know that that falls out of popularity once professional theatre begins to gain ground. So now let's talk a little bit about the conventions. So there's a whole list on the screen in front of you. You should be able to look at most tragedies that you study and go, oh yes, I can see the stock characters. I can see the cheated villain, I can see the soldier, I can see the pathetic child. There's also more in there, like the advisor, the wise advisor, and the buffoon. And we add all of that to our protagonists and antagonists, and suddenly we've got quite a large body of characters which go towards creating a really solid tragedy, which is going to really make the audience think about the nature of what's going on in front of them. There's always lots of minor villains that complicate matters. If we think about Much Ado About Nothing, even though it's a comedy because everything ends well, we've got lots of minor villains in there that get in the way of happiness happening. And the minor characters might as well not have a capital letter because they're not even made into proper nouns a lot of the time. They're soldier 1 or soldier 2. So there's no attempt to actually make them anything other than a flat device. This is very different to French tragedy and French dramas of the time, which were incredibly convoluted and complicated, and you really had to be awake and pay attention to understand the main plot. Some of this stuff, although, is converse to the unities if we go all the way back to Aristotle, because we've got subplots and asides and little instances of learning or little breaks in the tension which dilute the purity of that unity of time, place and action, but do increase the entertainment value. And let's face it, theatre is there to entertain and educate, but mostly to entertain. Finally, we've got this idea that the hierarchy of genre. So the highest form of any kind of literature is epic, and then comes on the lyric. So lyric poetry explores thoughts and feelings. Epic poetry tells huge stories like the Odyssey or the Iliad. Then comes comedy and drama with epic, tragedy, and tragedy is the lowest form of genre, apparently, according to Aristotle and Milton. But there's more to learn from tragedy, and actually we enjoy misery way more than we enjoy laughing and smiling. So I don't necessarily agree with Dr. Johnson and Aristotle here. I think tragedy actually is one of the higher forms of drama, but you need to know that there are people out there who have categorized and created this hierarchy of genres. Whether you like it or not, it exists, and you need to know that it's there. So that is the end of my waffling. I kind of hope you got something out of it. And I hope you certainly understand that with the idea of catharsis and agnoresis and hamertia and peripeteia and all of those things, the three unities, when we're thinking about Aristotle and we're thinking about all of those different things, you've got some key words and a bit of understanding that's going to help you write about tragedy, understand the text that you're studying at school, and actually just become better at evaluating the effect of what's on the page in front of you. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye bye.